All right, guys, get going. My name is Vladi Shlesman. I'm from a company called AUTOMIC. Okay, we are automation people, right? I want to talk today about our point of view on how to make a real use or even start adopting this amazing thing called Docker and containers, okay? So appreciate you coming here. There's a tough competition out there. So Google is talking and CloudBees and MuleSoft, all really cool vendors there. So appreciate you taking time to come here. We'll keep it relatively light, okay? I want to give you some perspective on this technology and kind of our point of view. Obviously, we are technology vendors, so I want you to see how we deal with this technology. And particularly, I feel strong about Docker because we use it very heavily internally, both in our development and in our kind of demo centers and in our kind of sales technicians, right? I'm running the pre-sales team for AUTOMIC globally. Okay, we based all over the world. We have an office in London. I'm based here, actually. And obviously, if you would like to see more what we do and to get a demo of this specific area as well, we'll be happy to do it either during the event or come and see wherever you are or do it over WebEx, okay? So let's start, okay? I want to, give you some general facts about the technology. Just give you again, I want to give you some bit of a perspective and maybe lift you a bit, away from your daily job just to see what other people are doing as well in this area. So Docker, right? It's all about microservices, right? The trend had been there for a while, right? I think basically people were fascinated with the modular design since, I think, the early ages of modernism, right? It was the idea of breaking everything in small pieces that we can then piece together. I think been there for a long time, and microservices yet another kind of evolution of that. I think Docker is a container technology that underpinning this microservices story probably is the most talking technology about in the 2016. I think it's the biggest trend we have, and rightfully so. It's really interesting thing. If we look at the adoption trends, right, we see that today, right, based on the Rebel Labs, it's a very interesting consulting company there. It's been popular for a while, but we can really see some facts on the ground. People actually start to adopt it. And the interesting thing that the enterprises, the biggest companies there, they are the main adopter of this technology, which is again, interesting trend, which is usually, we see those new cool technologies usually being adopted by the, lighter, quicker, early adopters. 34% adoption already, which is quite serious. Anybody here already adopting Docker, right? Probably more than 34%, okay? So if we look deeper into the details here, okay, we can see what people are actually doing with it, right? So what are the plans around microservices, right? So we can see 30% already have it in production, okay? 20% seriously piloting and looking into that. 25% sandboxing, playing with the idea, okay? The others, testing the ground, 3%, only 3% not even interested. So what we're learning from this, it's going to be there if you want it or not. It depends when. Chances are we'll all be using it in anger one way or another, right? And if we continue drilling into the numbers here, what are technologies being used today? We can see Docker is clear leader. Okay, obviously it's enterprise version Docker Swarm, which is like a clustering managed platform for using Docker in the enterprise. Okay, the others are still split. We can see a lot of people not sure yet which technology we'll use, which, by the way, makes another very interesting point. So today, Docker could be a clear leader. Tomorrow could be something else. And the way we're adopting containers and the whole idea of microservices may not be so Docker-driven as we might want to believe it will be, right? So that's another point I want to make in mind. Want you to keep in mind that Docker, even though a leader today, tomorrow could be somebody else, right? Google, very strong, betting on the container technology, Kubernetes, so things may change, right? I think the driving principles of that will not change, but the actual vendors, like we saw with virtualization, like we saw with the cloud technologies, right, with Amazon Azure, same story will happen here, okay? So what types of application typically end up being containerized, right? If you see in the graph here, we can see a lot of people looking at taking the new applications, right, putting them in container. Makes sense, really helps us with making those applications more portable, more easier to deploy. At the same time, 41% of respondents here said they will try to port the existing applications into the containers, which brings us to a new challenge here. Say, okay, it's not just about understanding this technology. It's not about implementing it from scratch. it's about migration and transition periods and how do we manage them and what the challenges that are associated with that. Okay, and this is extremely interesting area as well to think of, right? So which means that a lot of us will be in some kind of a hybrid mode, in some kind of transition mode, and we'll need to migrate our applications either by making them more container friendly or doing all sorts of tricks, which I believe I would like to cover today, that will help us to actually take full advantage of that technology. Okay. One last number, I believe, here, just to give you more, right? So what's the outcomes of that, right? And we'll have usually high expectations from things we implement, especially new gadgets, right? Being an iPhone or being at a new technology here. So we can see the interesting thing, only 12% of the respondents here said that microservices made their life easier, okay? 42 didn't see much change, okay, from that, which kind of defeats the purpose you were saying of using this, okay? 3% and 18% said actually things got more complicated since implementing this technology, and the others are not sure, right? So maybe and no, okay? So very interesting statistics here, okay? Which means the way you implement or adapt this exciting new thing can actually make a huge difference. It's not just about technology itself, it's how you do it and what you do with it, okay? And I want to virtually take another minute and take you a bit down the boring history lane. You've probably seen this enough, but I just want to make a point here. If we look at the IT evolution from 80s, right? We were in a situation where, I don't know, a lot of you guys already were there in front of the computer in the 80s, right? We had mainframes, and we had terminals, and we had some PCs showing up, right? And we say, well, this is the world we had. It's kind of cool. Then in 90s, things started to progress. We started to have networks. We started to have distributed service-oriented architecture started to show up, the dot-com era. All this nice and well. As we progress into noughties, things start to get very interesting, right? We start to get the managed code. We start to get our web applications, SaaS models, virtualization, right? And as we progress into these days, we start to see the cloud applications. And the most interesting thing, none of the things disappeared. Mainframe is still there, terminal is still there, PCs are still there, right? Everything just keeps adding up, okay? Nothing's going away. Mainframe probably going as strong as ever, right? We've been in business for like 30 years now in automation space, starting mainframe. We're now proud of being able to bring DevOps solutions and automation into the mainframe, and it's as popular as ever before, right? There's a lot of deals happening around mainframe, bringing your DevOps process in there, really cool stuff. Doesn't go anywhere. And the point I'm trying to make, your microservices is just another bullet point here. It's probably not going to replace anything, it's just adding to our complexity, to our tasks, right? Back to my previous slide. Doesn't make our life necessarily easier because it's yet another thing to manage, okay? And just a little joke here, we used to have a product called One Automation, and we say, well, it's one platform, can do all your automation needs, your service orchestration, your application release, your workload. And when I remember I had this meeting in Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, right? And I explained to the CIO say, we have this amazing platform and it's called One Automation. And he laughed and said, yeah, it's one automation for you, it's yet another automation for us, right? It's just, you cannot replace those things. Even if it can do everything, it doesn't, you cannot just remove it and replace it with cool thing. The transition periods are very long, and we have less and less appetite today in current businesses to rip and replace things or have a lengthy transformational projects. That's not happening. Everybody wants to see value right now, quick return, quick fix. And this is what's happening, right? So just a quick point here. And obviously making all the things work together, yet another challenge, okay? So what makes containers, I know everybody pretty much familiar with containers today already, so I don't want to teach you what containers are, but the idea, on the very short way, why containers are so cool and why they're different from virtual machine, is that it really, first time in the history of IT, somebody actually thought about not just coding the right application quick, but also make them deployable, right? Putting some thought ahead of how those applications will be deployed and making sure it's easy and manageable, and we're not creating new bottlenecks on the kind of operation side, on the deployment side of things. So basically, a container provides all the ecosystems that your application requires without putting additional overheads of the operating system on host, OS as VM does, right? So we can plug multiple applications on one kind of Docker host with everything they need. So we can, really don't deal with configuration issues and all these dependencies that we have to deal today with. So basically, containers allow us to streamline deployment of the application, or kind of build once, deploy everywhere, kind of thing. So back to our story, right? When you approach the containerization project or transformation to Docker, or even playing with that, or microservices in general, we have this beautiful picture in mind. We'll build all this reusable services. We'll be able to deploy them all in once or in their own speed. And often what's happening, we'll find ourselves doing this, right? And by the way, this is a real picture. It's I actually Googled it. So it's been taken in the 80s in a place called Comoros Islands, right? They're just northwest to Madagascar, right? The guys really didn't have any automation infrastructure, in those words, in the port, right, as all the modern ports have, which could take care of the offloading those big ships, right? And they did it for many, many years. Actually, they only fixed it like 10 years ago. I think they actually put some cranes and things like that. So this is perfect analogy to the point I will make in the next 10 minutes. So I think the actual automation and the ability to deal with the flow and volumes and the speed of containers of transportation makes huge difference, right? And this is exactly what happened in the automotive industry in 80s, right? You heard the stories of Toyota versus GM, right? The same stories happened in the logistics and shipments, and the same story happens in IT, right? The automation always or typically makes a difference, right? And what makes our life even more complex, right, is that those containers or those virtualization technologies or your applications do not operate in isolation. If I just look in the technology stack of today, right, without making you worry about your mainframes and about your old applications, right, there's so many other tools and so many other cool technologies that we use today. They're all part of the ecosystem, right? So when we bring another new technology, not only we obviously want to adopt it faster, we also want to make sure it fits within our existing tool chain, and it fits within our methodologies that we use today. Okay, one of the biggest technology adoption barrier, I believe, right? I've been in software sales for 2 decades now. It's people's human factor, right? We don't want to change much. We don't want to go and convince, even if I like it. I don't want to spend my days and months convincing somebody else that it's a cool thing. I just want to start using it, right? I want to make sure I get in value of that. And fitting something new easy into organization without breaking existing status quo or existing problems, I think it's key for really taking full advantage of this technology. And I think one of the problems of Docker is not, or containers in general, it's not the technology itself. I think it's that adoption challenges that we have, right? Is how do you fit it in without changing much? And basically when we talk about Docker challenges, it's really the speed of adoption, I think, is the main challenge, right? We want it to be there tomorrow, like yesterday, working, and we basically struggling to make it work because it's just difficult, okay? Would you agree? Anybody having the same kind of situation? Anybody's using DevOps tools today, I presume? Okay, just checking. All right, so is it the best thing ever, or is it just another recipe for making our life more difficult, right? So, as I said, a lot of it, right, is about a change. Are we ready to rip and replace our entire application and put it in the containers, right, and your existing core business applications? Or shall we sit and wait for the new generation of that application to build it right? Are we ready to deal with the lengthy transition periods when we have like a hybrid mode, where we need to operate some applications in the containers, some applications the old way, in the VMs, on-prem, or in the cloud, right? What if tomorrow your boss comes and say, hey, we just signed this new deal with Google, right? And we're going to use their technology just because we're getting, what do we do then? Do we start from scratch? Do we redesign everything? How do we set ourselves for the future where we're technology agnostic while keeping all the, right methodologies in place, and we can be as fast as we want to be, okay? Is your, other teams, like DBA picked in this case, are they on board as well, right? And are they ready? Or shall they be convinced or not? Or we can just do it without them, right? Was the right technology there? And another area, especially for the large enterprises, where we see a lot of those things happening today, does it fit into the compliance or governance policies of that company, right? Can you still stay in control while breaking your application into yet smaller pieces? Okay. All these questions obviously needs to be answered ideally before you start your journey, so things will be easier. And again, I'm not sure one size fits all, right? Every company, every application might be different. So again, my point is you need to be really prepared to be flexible, right? Be open-minded, being able to be in transition period, in hybrid mode, in move back and forth between different container providers, maybe, right? All of this you need to be honest about, because we cannot just say, hey, this is perfect thing, it's working for me now, let's go for it. Things are going to change, right? Things are not going to happen tomorrow. We know those transition periods last, right? And things change. So to me, this makes a big difference between really, adopting something that brings value, making everybody's life easier, to make it even less manageable, right? And if you look at the, this nice quote here, right, from IT world, right? So the guy says, breaking things into obviously pieces, right? Making applications small or microservices driven. This obviously seems like a good idea, right? But there's a very fine line, right, where we create yet more complexity and make things, less manageable. How do we do it right? Where we cross that line where things just get out of control, all right? And to me, right, when we start talking about technology, obviously I already told you my solution. It's all about the right automation. I'll get in more details there, but the solution there is not necessarily about replacing your tool set, right? The same approach to the tool set as to actual containers, right? I think it's not about replacing specific tools that comes with the containers, because they are designed to do something very specific, right? And they're there, and they're designed typically by container manufacturer, like Docker in this case, like Docker Swarm, and they're great and they're doing their job, right? It also helps us really to think about how we design our container architecture that really, creates a synergy where we can bring all things together and make it work, right? It's not about also replacing your scripts or things that already work, right? So these guys who adopted, probably half of you already playing with it. You probably have a lot of mileage on it already, right? You have your typically scripts, I would imagine, that help you to manage those things, right? I don't think it's about, let's throw this all away and start, putting our automation in place. I think there's a lot of effort and a lot of good things happening within, the solutions that people built on the early adoption stages, and I think there's opportunity to use them as well, and there's at the same time opportunity to put more controls and more maybe reduce customization requirements around those. Okay, so I won't talk about this in a second. Okay, and it's also not we don't need to kind of reinvent the wheel, as I was trying to make the point before. It's just yet another technology that we need to manage, yet another opportunity for us to make things easier. And we need to apply the same thinking, right? The same approach, if you like, as you would do with any other project or any other technology. There's nothing, fundamentally different about adopting containers from adopting virtualization or Amazon or things like that, right? So apply the same logic there. Again, I believe planning your adoption strategy is the key here as much as evaluating the technology, right? So the solution, right? I believe the solution is in automation, right? How do we keep all these little parts moving together? How do we take something cool and industrialize it and let everybody take full advantage without worrying about misconfiguration or security or other compliance or governance issues that we have, right? What we do in AUTOMIC, we basically enable organizations to model an entire application, right, as it is today, for example, right? Looking at the actual application components. For example, what's your front end, what's your back end, what's your database, middleware, and so on. We model then how the application is being deployed, right? And we personally use our workflow engine, right? So there's basically workflow associated with every change or every change for any component. And those workflows then describe and become an amazing documentation also of the process, how the thing's being deployed, right? And the third aspect here. The third aspect is the environments, right? We know our environments change all the time, right? Environments can be dynamic. They can be on-prem or in the cloud, right? They could be difficult. And we know that there is a huge difference between our staging or development environment and our testing environment and production environment, right? So all these changes are, also all these environments are modeled as well in that area. And here is an opportunity for us, right? So when we add containers, there's an opportunity for us to actually map or model the connection between, the environments to the Docker containers, right, or container providers. So now when we say, okay, I want to deploy this application into that environment, right, the system will automatically, based on the model, say, okay, this change should use those workflows. It should go to the environment we picked, and this environment consists of a number of different containers that then can be provisioned and configured based on the model. Okay? By doing that, you really remove that, another moving part to manage or worry about, is my environment containerized, or I need to actually deploy the whole application with the middleware, or I need to worry where those containers are, or where they've been approved by our IT or whoever needs to approve it, or where they're taken from the right place. All this can be done, obviously, automatically as part of the model, while ensuring the governance and control at the same time. Okay, so what we really enable people is then not just to automate the process of, for example, provisioning an application or promoting the applications in different environments, but also kind of push the boundaries of what automation can do. For example, we can, I think I have it in the next slide. Okay, we can provide orchestration and automation of the entire tool chain, all right, that you see in your DevOps. So when you build your pipeline, right, you can say, okay, I need to pick my changes from Jenkins, right? Then I need to deploy them automatically every time there is a build into my development environment, right? Development environment can be there, or we can say, well, it's not there, let's spin our Docker containers, then deploy the application on top, right? Then, once the testing will finished, in a click of the button, or maybe automatically based on the process, right? We can then promote this application to the testing environment, and then automatically kick off the testing tools, right? With certain parameters, again, based on that specific application. And at the same time, providing the updates to, like, closing the loops, updating our Jira tickets or whatever you guys use, ServiceNow and so on. So you have this control and continue orchestrating the entire process, right, from one place. So what it looks like really when you're creating the pipeline, the continuous delivery pipe, right? So you take care of the packages, workflows, and models, which is discussed that. But then you can also, again, provide your developers, for example, the self-service portal, right? You guys need an environment, you need an application, you need data, whatever it is. You can log into your, Jira or our UI if you like, or your ServiceNow, and request things, right, based on the catalog. And then we can provision them automatically in a consistent way, right? And maybe deprovision them when the usage is finished, right? It's very important to kill those and clean the environments and learn from the experience, right? It's another thing that we obviously provide, is constantly looking into how the automation is ticking, where the problems are, where the failures, providing rollbacks, providing configuration snapshots, all these things, right? And compliance, again, is I keep coming back. I believe last year, talking to large financials and telcos, I think governance and compliance was one of the main drivers behind containers and DevOps adoption in general, right? People say we're agile enough, we just want to stay in control because we know how many moving parts in there, and when the things break, they break so badly we cannot recover, right? So putting automation also making sure you automating consistent, you operate in a consistent way, okay? And things execute in the way you design them, within the workflows, within the models. You have a full audit trail of who did what, who approved what, and so on, what the application looked like before the deployment, or environment looked before the deployment, what it looked like after the deployment. All this is done here, right? So it gives you also the opportunity to really chain or build your continuous delivery pipelines the way you want them, without changing the way your applications are being built or designed or developed, right? It's really in your hands, right, to decide that workflow. And again, containers will just become yet another object there for you to say, well, my application runs within container, and from end user perspective, which in this case could be obviously a developer, it doesn't matter, right? You don't need to worry about it. So just a few words, right, on our amazing platform really here. And the idea is that it's, I believe the automation should be as invisible as behind the scenes as possible, right? It's not about convincing people, hey, there's another great tool, another UI, it doesn't have to be that way, right? So our experience tells us we better work behind the scenes, orchestrate and integrate into whatever process you like, and remove the complexity that comes with the modern applications or methodologies, okay? We believe that we can bring a lot of value out of the box. So, I know you guys are all very capable in developing, but I think your main objective is really focus on the application functionality, on the business value the applications bring. It's not on scripting the deployments or dealing with configuration of the Docker containers and so on. So we believe we can remove or free the time of the developers to focus on developing features and bring them out of the box content that will help them to deploy the applications faster and remove maybe needs to script and things like that. So we bring a lot of out-of-the-box integrations with whatever tools you have there. We also have marketplace, by the way, where our customers or our partners share the content they build. So, for example, somebody built fantastic content for Informatica system, BI systems, how to deploy applications there. Somebody just put on the marketplace and shares there. Okay. Another thing that we have, and we may be different there from other vendors in that space, is that we've been around for over 2 decades, right? We started in mainframe world, and we bring that support of legacy platforms. So as I said, we can run on anything old, right? So we have actually very interesting experience now with the large retailers. So Walmart, actually, I probably can mention the name. We closed massive deal with Walmart in the States, where we provide the same kind of DevOps technology for the points of sales, right? Running on very old applications and mainframe on the back, and financials, right? Where we can run updates to the mainframe through the same pipes, through the same methodology, right? With the same visibility and controls you will have for your new applications, right? So to me, speed today, obviously, you probably heard it more than once. It's all about speed, right? It's how you move faster without breaking things. And I think this is where automation can really help. And again, us being around for many years, we can execute things on a massive scale because we've been there, executing batch and the end of the day for large banks and large manufacturers like Bosch and Siemens in Germany, things like that. So I know one of my heroes, Keith Richards, of Rolling Stones, he said the band can be only as good as your drummer, right? And I'll try to paraphrase it. I think your organization or your IT development team can be as agile, I think, as the automation platform that you have. It's not just about executing your processes fast. It's also about being able to change automation fast based on your needs. So today you have Docker, tomorrow you have something else. You can simply change one item in your workflow and you sort it, right? So I think thinking about automation not just as a mean of removing manual work. I think we kind of passed that, in the previous years. Today, the next generation of automation is how agile your automation is, how quickly you can adapt new technologies. And Docker here is a great example of how quickly you can take full advantage of it without, making everybody expert on Docker in your organization, without, breaking any process and any compliance rules. Okay. This is my presentation. Okay, 2 minutes before the end. Any questions, any comments, any thoughts? You want to share your experience? Make sense? Who adopted Docker here again? Maybe you can share some points. What was the number one challenge when you start looking into that?
Initially getting your head around what it was that you're actually trying to do, and once you actually worked out what it was that was the reality of the situation. Simple things like networking between your components, and then understanding the detail, things like memory consumption.
Right.
We're probably all in the Java spectrum here, so it got down to silly things like the fact that depending on which particular variant of the libc library we were using, you could see exploding memory growth all across your servers. So it was a little bit of a devil in the detail because sometimes your systems were running perfectly fine. You didn't realize they were consuming vast quantities of memory due to little things like that and C groups and that kind of stuff. So at the Docker level, it's been a little bit of a curve, shall we say, to learn what it is you're actually trying to do in the ops environment. And of course, the fact that if you're launching multiple instances of an application, it's almost impossible to make use of JMX remotely.
Correct.
As a consequence, you have to emit your metrics and that kind of stuff
Yes.
rather than connect to your containers,
Yes.
which just wasn't designed in.
How do you omit metrics?
In our case, we are adopting Spring Boot across the fleet. And Spring Boot integrates with things like, it has an actuator
Which
component,
exposes your MSP.
which exposes stuff, but you can also integrate with the likes of DropWizard. Not from the complete framework of DropWizard, just their metrics component. And as a consequence, you end up gaining, we use things like Apache Camel for routing stuff. And that can do things like automatic recording of how many times the message has gone through a particular route within your application, which could include things like stuff received via a REST endpoint or stuff going through a particular process or whatever else it might be on the back end. Either way, they all get to be collected up, and you can basically program exporters to do whatever it is you actually want to do. So we're in the process at the moment of collecting it all up via a Redis, a local instance of Redis, and just bung the whole lot into a Docker Compose file, launch it all up, and start feeding into graphing tools, basically.
Was it worth it?
Sorry?
Was it worth moving to Docker? Like what?
Yeah, it is, mainly because you can essentially just expand the number of physical hosts to cope with whatever your software demand actually happens to be. As if, in our case, we might in the company I work for, we send vast volumes of SMS messages. We work for government, and in our case, we might discover that maybe we need to launch multiple copies of our sender processes just to be able to cope with the input demand.
So how do you spin them? What do you use to kind of start massive quantities of Docker containers? What do you do today?
At the moment, we have to use a Docker Compose scale command,
Right.
And it's as raw as that. However, it prevents us from having to launch individual VMs or whatever else. We've previously used tools, technologies like LXC to do much the same sort of work, but you don't get the kind of visibility that you do with the Docker because with Docker you at least get a proper command line tooling set that comes up with something slightly more consistent. But the main problem of adopting the likes of Docker is that you end up getting this additional layer between the hardware and what your activities are actually, because we all end up being focused on things like JVM memory usage and garbage collection. What you can't see is whether or not Docker is in the middle doing something, and a lot of the libraries in between, a lot of the individual layers aren't yet C groups enabled, and as a consequence, you can't necessarily see what your real environment looks like.
Very interesting. Good. Okay, thanks. Any others? Yes.
I don't know if you were in the LMAX talk earlier.
I'm not. No,
Oh, okay.
sorry.
So they were talking a bit about their automation framework that they built themselves, and one of the points that they were making was that it's just as mission critical as all the other software they make, and they do code reviews, all the
versioning, yes.
It's checked in. It's just part of the team's workflow. So, does this platform lend itself to be, check-inable, code reviewable?
Yes.
How have you made changes and how they're
it's a fantastic point. Again, we've been in that kind of business critical, mission critical business for many years, right? So, for example, entire, Deutsche Bank, retail bank, or Bosch, for example, or FedEx companies like FedEx or DHL, they run on our platform for all of day batch processing, all of the end of the day kind of jobs and everything. So we execute up to 1 million+ jobs a day. By the way, the story, if you heard, was RBS a few years ago when there was a massive meltdown in RBS. It happened as a result of the scheduling system going down. Right, this is what happened. Not of the business applications. Right, somebody upgraded the workload automation system, and it didn't work, and they couldn't recover from that, and this caused all these issues. Right, so obviously we put a lot of features there, right, to prevent. This wasn't our system, by the way, but to prevent this from happening. Right, so for example, we are fully resilient, being an application layer cluster technology. Right, so you can put as many engines, automation engines, as you like. Connect them together.
different questions.
Right.
Maybe your system is perfect and that's great, but how do I see who's made what changed?
Well, exactly. So I'm getting there, right? So in addition, obviously, every workflow and every object that's used inside of the workflow, we treat as a code, right? So it's security protected based on your role, right, or groups or Active Directory, whatever you use. So you watch that. You monitor every change. You can keep the track if it's external system as well, if you like, right? If you keep all of your items somewhere else. There are ways also, we fully multi-tenant as well, so you can segregate things as well and then promote the content, the automation content between different virtual clients, right? So for example, you use it for dev, for prod and so on, so you have that kind of release as well of the automation. We also keep full audit trail of everything that's been changed to automation and to actual execution. And you can have long history, right? It's very good for compliance reporting and things like that, so you can see who triggered that or who, you have also full approval mechanism, which can be quite complex with multiple workflows and time periods. So all this built in there, and other things like encryption and all the security features that you may need as well. So there's no question that automation becomes very, very important, right? And this is, again, provisioning infrastructure is obviously important, but it may be not as important as running your end of the day banking processes, right? Where just people not getting the money, right? What's happening. So we can obviously get more details, but it's absolutely part of, I think this is what made our entry into that space so much easier, because we've been sitting on the enterprise automation for so long. We just added additional capabilities into that space to accommodate the new processes and the new technologies. And yeah, I want to hear other drivers for Docker adoption. Who adopted Docker? What was the reason? Why did you went through all this, or still going through this? What was the reason? Any thoughts? Yes.
So for us, I work in a team of Java devs.
Mm-hmm.
I also work with two of the JavaScript teams,
mm-hmm.
and they need to use our application to perform an end-to-end operation. And none of them wanted to install Java,
right?
Which is fair enough. So it was a lot easier for us to deploy the stuff that they needed as containers.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't need to have any understanding of how our application works. Also, they don't need to understand how any of our dependencies work.
Right.
They just get the images, we build a compose file together, and it all just works.
Perfect.
Whereas before, we would have to go through, or they would have to go through a list of how to build our software, how to install the dependencies,
yes,
to build the development environment.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. So this is exactly what we went through, for example, on the pre-sale side. So I have 60, 70 pre-sales engineers, right, who demo technology all the time. So we need to spin big environments very quickly, right, to show some complex automation scenario. So then we start using Docker. So today I can just take my iPhone and send an email with parameters, right, and our automation engine will go and stand up an environment in Amazon or in our cloud in Austria somewhere, and we can use the demo, and then it will just kill itself, and it goes quiet. So we don't need to worry about whether it's a WebLogic or it's a WebSphere or it's a Tomcat, right? I just say what demo I want to show, and I don't need to know anything about that, right? So this is the beauty of this technology, obviously, with the right automation or interface on front makes it even easier, right? So makes people like me able to quickly spin it up and use it, right? Okay. All right, guys, well, we're going to finish here. If you have any more questions or you would like to see it in more details, how this can be implemented, right? Come talk to us. We have a stand there, or we can, again, talk to you in more details later if you're interested. All right? Thank you very much.